Hi, my name is Leah Rozumov, and I am a senior in the exercise science program at Syracuse University. And today I will be doing a critique of the effect of university students' sedentary behavior on stress, anxiety, and depression. I would like to thank my mentor, Dr. Joon Kim, for helping me throughout this process. So, for just a little background, sedentary behavior is defined as any waking behavior characterized by an energy expenditure of less than 1.5 METs. So, sitting, reclining, lying, basically any um, form of staying in the same position and not being active would be defined as sedentary behavior. The relationship between activity levels and mental health has been thoroughly studied, and many findings do conclude that higher activities benefit status and mental health. So there is a positive correlation between exercising more and being more active and the likelihood of mental health issues such as depression, stress, anxiety being lessened due to activity levels. Due to this, it is likely that sedentary behavior elevates the severity of these conditions. It's not necessarily saying that it makes them absolutely horrible, but because of the opposite side of the relationship between mental health and exercise, it is very likely that sedentary behavior does worsen these situations. So, the research gap that we have here is that few studies have examined the relationship between sedentary behavior and mental health rather than many studies that have been done on the relationship between mental health and exercise. Not many have looked at the opposite end of things with sedentary behavior. And there is lack of evidence in this specific age range, although not many studies have been done on sedentary behavior in all. Many that were done were focusing on older and elderly adults. So this is college students and young adults that have just entered a new environment in college and are probably one of the first groups to be in this age group and doing sedentary research. So the purpose of the study by Leah and Kim was to evaluate the effect of Korean university students' sedentary behavior on stress, anxiety, and depression. Our research methods were that participants were chosen from two different universities in South Korea, and questionnaires were specific to sedentary behavior. They were distributed to 300 students. 282 students did fill them out and respond. And because of incomplete questionnaires or surveys that were given out, 244 were only used for the final analysis. So those 244 were completely filled out. Every question was answered. And the weekday and weekend sedentary times were calculated as weighted averages. So it was 5 out of 7 for weekdays and 2 out of 7 for weekends. So we had multiple types of questionnaires that were being used. First, we had the perceived stress scale for evaluating stress. This was a Korean modified version, so it was very similar to the original perceived stress scale, but had a bit of change to it. For anxiety, the Beck Anxiety Inventory, or BIA, was used. This includes 21 items referring to cognitive, emotional, and physical dimensions of anxiety. So kind of just asking questions about, when do you feel the most anxious? Do you think you have anxiety? Questions of that sort. For depression, the Center for Epidemiological Studies depression scale was used. And our inclusion criteria was wide. It was all university students, as long as you fell in that age range, all levels of activity, low activity, normal, high, all the levels. Both males and females were included, and complete questionnaires must be answered in order to be included. For the exclusion, really the only group that could not partake in this was students who did not attend chapel classes. This was because students that partook in chapel classes definitely were more likely to be taking more well-rounded courses, so liberal arts courses and things of those sorts. So this was our first table. Basically, it's just the ranges of sedentary behavior during the weekends, weekdays, and the ranges of stress, anxiety, and depression for the individuals that were questioned and surveyed. So as you can see here, there's definitely a wide range for sedentary behavior. We see that by the hour, the minimum was 0.49 and our maximum went all the way up to 18 hours. So there's definitely a wide range of different types of sedentary behavior. For the stress, anxiety, and depression, we definitely see the biggest change between stress levels. Our minimum is 1.1 and our maximum is 4.9. But for all of them, there's definitely a change. For anxiety, we see that our minimum was 0, so absolutely none at all. So our second table had to do with the demographics of the people that were involved. So sex, living with parents, BMI, basically their classifications for weight status and things like that. So the things that we see are definitely most important are that females had a lot more mental health conditions, stress, anxiety, depression than males. And the obesity range, rather than underweight, normal, or overweight individuals, had the most high ranges of mean for stress, anxiety, and depression. The next table of demographics was more for underlying diseases, perceived economic status, and self-management for health. So here, the most important things we see is that those who did have an underlying disease, such as diabetes, etc., they definitely did have higher levels of stress, anxiety, depression. And for self-management, those who did not have any self-management, or so they claimed, had the highest levels of mental health conditions as well. So here we see the effect of sedentary behavior on mental health. Basically, we're comparing the models 1 and 2 from stress, anxiety, depression with sedentary behavior and separating that by regular sedentary behavior and then split between the weekdays and weekends. We see that there is definitely a wide range here, but the highest values were definitely for depression and for stress as well. So our conclusions were that the study found that increased sedentary behavior was shown to elevate mental health issues in college students, and future studies should be warranted to investigate potential relationship between sedentary behavior and mental health within various settings to generalize the findings. The authors did claim that although they definitely found a correlation between sedentary behavior and mental health issues, that more research should be done because this was a very specific age group and a very specific demographic. All these students are enrolled in only 2 different universities that are very similar. So doing more of this study in a bigger population with larger age groups and more amounts of demographics would be very important. So my first critique is that the study used self-reported scales to evaluate sedentary behavior. They also use this for stress, anxiety, and depression. And this can definitely lead to under or overestimation and in turn hinder the validity and reliability of the study. So for example, if you are given a questionnaire and one of the questions says, on average, how many hours a week do you sit, lie down? It's most likely going to happen that people will answer more time than they actually do because they don't want to be seen as someone that's taking part in a large segment of sedentary behavior. Testing such as salivary biomarkers, such as cortisol and CGA, are a more accurate evaluation that can differentiate levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. And although this is a more expensive, complicated version of finding these mental health conditions, it's a quick salivary swab And basically it tests these biomarkers to see if stress, anxiety, and depression are present and at what severity they are. So our second critique is that sedentary behavior was grouped into one category rather than separate groups such as regular sedentary or leisurely sedentary. So this is necessary because as college students, we must take part in sedentary behavior. Sometimes we can't avoid it to complete course-related work and study and other tasks. For example, when we sit in class for multiple hours out of the day, there's no option to stand. There's no standing desks. You have to sit at your desk for the remainder of the class, which can range from 1 hour to 3.5 hours. So under those conditions, you can't really control these circumstances. Having leisurely sedentary and regular sedentary would be beneficial because leisurely sedentary would mark when, these students are watching TV, laying on the couch, rather than just sitting and studying. My third critique is that previous mental health status was not considered in this study. Students in this study could have easily come into college with anxiety, stress, or depression while being highly active before large amounts of work were introduced. This, can definitely show a difference based on if these students already were diagnosed, which their physicians and medical professionals would be able to tell them before they entered their university. However, this question was not asked in the study, so they could have already came in no matter what their sedentary levels are and already had been diagnosed with severe anxiety or depression. So a medical history of any mental health disease should definitely be checked in this study. My final critique is that a large proportion of participants were female. So there were 195 females versus 49 males, which is almost 4 times the amount of males that were accounted for. And this makes it difficult to generalize the results presented due to the sex differences being addressed on a regression analysis. I'd like to thank my mentor once again, Dr. Joon Kim, and my clinical research lab members who have helped me through this whole process and been there to lead me. I'd also like to thank Syracuse University and the Department of Exercise Science. And lastly, thank you, IOHSK.